Hi, I'm Kimberly from the Country Bookshop, and I want to welcome Sheryl Kaskowitz and congratulate her on today's paperback release of A Chance to Harmonize: How FDR's Hidden Music Unit Sought to Save America from the Great Depression, One Song at a Time. The Country Bookshop is located in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and we are owned by our local newspaper, The Pilot. We were founded in 1953, and we absolutely love being a part of your lives. We hope you definitely buy Cheryl's book from us, but also that you come visit us in the store, find us on social media, and shop with us whenever you can. We're happy to answer questions and help to guide you to interesting books just almost as good as this one. Let me tell you a little bit about Sheryl before we jump into our conversation. Since earning her PhD from Harvard, Sheryl has written extensively about music and American culture in the 20th and 21st centuries and the role that music can play in civic life. Her first book, God Bless America: The Surprising History of an Iconic Song, was published in 2013 and to a slew of very positive reviews. And she continues to write for many things, including the New York Times, Slate, Humanity, and the Avid Listener. In 2023, she transitioned from print to audio storytelling as an Audio Academy Fellow at KLW Public Media, and currently writes and produces audio pieces for their news, Cross Currents, and Philosophy Talk. She received the Ann Pure Mid-Career Fellowship from the Southern Association for Women's Historians in 2022, a Public Scholars Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Humanities, a Coleridge Fellowship from the Library of Congress, and research grants and awards from the American Musicological Society, Association for Recorded Sound Collections, Franklin Eleanor Roosevelt Institution, Music Library Association, and Society for American Music. She is the co-founding member of the women's vocal ensemble Solstice, and was born and raised in the Bay Area, where she continues to live with her husband, two teenagers, and her dog. So welcome and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I want to start our conversation off with a term that comes up in the book. Your research has it coming out of a field director from the Resettlement Administration. It's I don't even know if I can pronounce it right, the Slaw of Despond. It spoke to me. It means, I looked it up, it means a literal bog and metaphorical state of overwhelming doubt, fear, and hopelessness. And it originally comes from Pilgrim's Progress, but he used it to just capture the state of the outlook of everybody in America at that moment. Before we begin, can you give a little overview of the state of the country at the time of your book, just for people who might not be as familiar?
Sure. I mean, the Great Depression, just decimated the economy. Unemployment was astronomical. People lost everything. So farmers couldn't sell their crops. They were letting crops, just wilt in their fields. People in cities were starving, and everybody was out of work. And they're just, it was, I think that it is important for us to remember, just how devastating it was just across the board.
Yeah, I think it's, as your book unfolds, there's so many details of how bad that moment was, and the disparity across the country, and then all the different ways that people are so innovative in tackling it. And one of the things I love about the structure of the book is, as you're leading us into the secret music unit, special skills, and the way it was established in your prologue, you really get us to the point that there are these people in leadership who are following the energy of something that ignited people during the first kind of immediate emergency response in that moment. Can you specifically talk about the energy and enthusiasm that was caught in Key West and how that spoke to some people in leadership?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Key West was one of the hardest hit areas. Um, and it was a time at the beginning of the Great Depression. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932 with this idea of launching a New Deal and really doing something. And so at that point, at the beginning, they were willing to experiment. And so Key West had actually gone bankrupt. And the state and had taken over, and the governor brought in the federal government, which at that point was ju just really interested in helping people out of this of where they were, both economically and I will say in terms of morale. And so they went in. At that time, it was the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, or FARA, and said, you know what? You're all unemployed. Let's come together and remake Key West into a tourist destination. And, so they brought in, landscapers, and, the part that I found so interesting, and they brought in artists to make things beautiful. And then also, so it was putting the artists to work, and then it was also making Key West beautiful. And they were also producing things for tourism. So, they all had to paint X number of watercolor cards so that, that could go on brochures and things like that. Um, and so, uh, and they just found that giving the community this sense of pride in what they could do made a huge difference. And the other thing that I loved is that they launched a production of Pirates of Penzance. It felt to me, as I said in the book, like one of those sort of let's put on a show movies from the 1930s, where they all came together. And that's where one of the director of the painting program, whose name was Adrian Dornbush, and he kind of emerges as one of the main characters in my book, was tapped to direct this play when the director got in a car crash. It really felt like a movie. um, and they performed the play on as tourists are coming, and so it's just this sort of the people in the New Deal administration called it an experiment, and were coming to see like what happens when you really you know kind of invest in creating this sense of community, and using the arts and things like that. And so yeah, it was it kind of launched this idea of, well, could this be done in other places?
I think you do such a good job of explaining that in the prologue. And the it's interesting as going through your book, as you introduce other great characters who kind of emerge as the music unit unfolds. Simultaneously, in other areas of the country, you talk about the settlement houses that are doing some similar work in more urban areas. And I, I could ask you to go into the history of the settlement house movement, but I just wanted to, instead, I would just mention it. And I'm going to kind of ask a long question to lead you into the next. But so much of the book deals with this, uh, trying to conquer this class disparity too, that is happening on multiple levels at the time, and that exists everywhere in the book. I'm talking to you from Pinehurst, and it is local legend of Charlie Seeger coming through Pinehurst. Like, people still talk about it all the time, and I love that you mention it. But you use him as an example of this, how his tastes his views of music and where value lies evolved over the time you cover in the book. Um, but this picture of the two Americas, more than that, like a kaleidoscope, but the divide is so stark, and it comes through as you're highlighting the California Christmas radio broadcast from one of the migrant camps, the Hollywood stars interviewing the migrants, the minstrel culture and Jim Crow, and then the music unit in itself, all these people coming from a different area of music to rural America. The fact that the Roosevelts even liked folk music, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the value of the skill set that some of the people, the characters as you call them, like Margaret and Sidney specifically, the people skill set that was required over and over and over. And, at first they thought it was the music and the music did everything, but it was the people first that allowed for the work to that we'll talk about in a minute to move forth. Can you go into that skill set and highlight that a little bit? The personalities that were put into the field to allow for what happened to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Margaret Valiant emerges as the star, I think, of my book. I'm still kind of blown away by her. I will say I actually started my research focusing on Sidney Robertson, who I knew about already, and because she was the one who did the collecting and the uh, left the recordings that we have. And so that was where I started. And then in my research, I just kept coming up to this woman, Margaret Valiant. And at some point I was like, okay, I need to include her. And so I kind of regrouped. Originally, the song was called Government Song Woman, and then it was called Government Song Women. So it's been through a whole evolution. But so Margaret Valiant she was born in the South in Mississippi, and then had the opportunity to study music at the conservatory in Cincinnati, and basically just remade herself, and she had this knack for making friends, wealthy friends, who, then were really um, invested in helping her. And so but she never lost her her sense of I don't know. I think she just had this sort of magnetic charm. Um, and so she moved to New York. She was in a Ziegfeld production in Broadway. She spent time in Europe. She sang opera. She learned European folk songs. And I think anywhere she went, I call her a kind of chameleon because she just could adapt and charm people wherever she went. And then she also had this amazing musical skill. And so it was kind of this magical combination because as you said, there were these settlement houses in urban areas, and um, what my book talks about is the resettlement administration, which it wasn't like a direct nobody talked about it that way, but to me, it was so clearly this new idea and it was basically just basically allowing people to start over. So they'd lost everything. People were invited to come to these new communities that they were literally building from scratch. And they, from their experience in Key West, there was this sense that the arts and music could play a role. Um, and so Margaret was sent into these communities, and they really were all across the country. The ones that the music unit in Washington, D.C. focused on were in the Southeast. And so she, as you said, the Slough of Despond was something that someone said in Cherry Lake, Florida, where because what basically they said, okay, come to this community that we're building from scratch and help build your house. And so when Margaret arrived, those houses hadn't yet been built. People were living in their chicken coops. And it was a really rough time. And the idea behind the music unit was um, find the music that speaks to the people in the community and help and let and encourage it basically. And let it help create this sense of community so that people will want to connect with each other. And this is the part that comes from this very progressive strain of the New Deal, that because the head of the Resettlement Administration was his name was Rexford G. Tugwell, and critics branded him Rex the Red, and he was unapologetic in his belief in, he called it collectivism or communalism, um, which was way too close to communism for people, for conservatives. And he didn't care. He was just like, the only way out of this, out of the Great Depression, is for people to basically he felt like the US needed a different mindset of away from this rugged individualism and towards this sense of community responsibility. And um so it's kind of hard to understand, but I think in terms of the role of music there, it's like get people to feel like a community so that they will, because people weren't really getting along in these new communities. Everybody was struggling. People were coming from different places. And so this idea that then it was going to allow for, say, cooperative farming, at cooperative factories, like it had this whole new idea, right? Um, and so Margaret's job was come come into this community and use music to help unite them. Um,
One of the things that I thought was so interesting and that you did such a wonderful job highlighting is that it, well, I think you mentioned she won the first Guggenheim in woman to win the first Guggenheim in composition. And her music skill set was off the charts, but it was this magnetic personality that allowed for her to do this job. Because as you talk about the state of the situation, people are not readily interested in moving from that depressed individual
uh-oh, I lost you.
to do.
Sorry.
Um, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Well, um, I think that you talk about Margaret and you talk about Sidney, and they're some of the two main aspects of the music unit. You talk about Margaret going into the RA settlements and creating space for the music to connect people. And then you talk about Sidney and her recordings, and that was your first entry point. Can you highlight a little bit about how Sidney's people skills allowed for her recordings to be different than the collectors that existed at the time? What specifically was different about who she collected, the how she used her people and energy and enthusiasm and belief in listening to create space to collect different kinds of recordings.
Yeah, well, I think that it, this was part of what sparked the book was when I got to the recordings and Sydney, and it just said everywhere that the Resettlement Administration was doing them, and I was like, what why was the Resettlement Administration making these recordings? Um, and so they sent Sydney out to record the music of the people, right? And so she really had, as opposed to, so John Lomax, Alan Lomax's father, was, um, sort of a figure in this field at that time. And Alan Lomax was just starting, and there was this focus on the songs themselves and sort of preserving these songs. And Sydney was really interested in the people and then the role that the songs played in their lives. And so she would go and just tell people to perform or sing or play the songs that meant something to them. And I think that that comes through in the recordings, um that she was just really interested in the people.
Um, One of the things that that came through when I was looking at your research in the book, which I'll hold up one more time in case everyone forgot they need to get their copy of the book, um, is how she viewed the importance of being an audience. And when she first went out there, you talk about her going with two other collectors who very much remind me of, like, grave robbers in a way, like collecting for sport. Um, and how she responded, how she observed their lack of interest in the humans in front of them. Um, when you I'm asking you a question that is not necessarily in your book, so
Okay, I'm
uh,
ready.
you're ready. You're ready. Just put your heads up. But um, the power of her attention and how it brought out a different kind of performance. And then later, as the recordings were used kind of towards the end of the book to also reflect back to people across the country, all the different immigrants and folk singers, and reflect themselves back to themselves, and that aspect of listening and ref- connecting and reflecting. We can take it into other ways, but can you talk about, as you're researching this and as you've studied this your entire career, just what your thoughts are about that, or how you understand that, because it's a current that seems to run through your study. And I'm just wondering if you could just talk to what all of your study has led you to understand about the power of that, or what that even is.
Hmm. Well, I think that it was something that Sydney, it kind of unfolds for us and Sydney as she's, because she had never recorded anything before. And then she really let herself go beyond the bounds of these resettlement communities, to I mean, some of my favorite recordings are the ones she made, of the labor, activists. And the other thing about Sydney is that she was such a fantastic writer, and her voice really comes through in her writing. And so I feel very lucky about that. But she just evokes these scenes of these people who are getting together, to share this music that they had been using in these protests in St. Louis. Um, and I think that the idea of sharing, um, and it goes beyond preserving, right? So there was this an older idea that, these songs, these folk songs are going to die out, and so we need to record them. And she was very much more about um like celebrating or acknowledging, and I think that for so then, as you said, she was assigned to the upper Midwest. So she went to somewhere completely different, and she discovered these enclaves of, new immigrants from Europe, from Finland, from in Wisconsin, and she went and talked to, um, the people up in these enclaves where they she went to bars, right? Like in rural Wisconsin, and it was about recognizing that that had value, right? And I think that that was also something that went all the way up to the top. I mean, both FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt were interested in listening to these recordings. And there's evidence that they did listen to the recordings. And as you said, they liked folk music. There was this idea that it really represented the people. Um, and and so I think that this I think I mentioned the idea of morale in terms of um, a less tangible goal of the New Deal was to help that, that they actually really felt like that was important to sort of strengthening the country. And I think that recording and just the act of, hey, you know, I am interested in the music that you sing on your porch, or and that it's um valuable. So yeah.
It's valuable, and I think what comes through in the book too, as they were on the ground, as traveling through the country, in early vehicle times, even recognizing that these labor clashes were happening everywhere in every town, at every mill, and that music was the unifying force in this really deep skirmishes all over labor war. And you chronicle Sidney trying to record these, but also through her letters, as you said, an incredible writer. What she realizes is the structure of these songs. It's all different words on the common popular song. Can you talk about that a little more, about what that is, how they were referenced, just really what was going on in, the music unit was secret, the way that these songs were passed were secret. There are other books that have been written recently about all these skirmishes. The Battle of Blair's Mountain is one. I mean, they're popping up, but so much of this is hidden history.
Yeah. Well, I what Sydney found and was sort of what she says is that she was skeptical of these songs that would be, say, a familiar tune, and then you put new words to them, to it. And she felt like that wasn't, she didn't really understand the power of it until she saw it. I mean, one of my favorite recordings is this rockabye version of Rockabye Baby. Um,
Which is on your website. I would like to just reiterate, all of these recordings that you reference in the book are on your website, and I heard it, but keep going.
Yes, and so it has these protest lyrics, and there is something that she recognized, and that, I have certainly found in my other research, that it's layering the meaning of the song onto something that already resonates with people, right? And then that gives it I mean, not only does it mean that they know the melody and they can sing it pretty easily, um, but it gives the lyrics new power because people already have some connection to whatever the song is, and that's one example. Um, yeah.
It really rang home to me as a reader of your research that that power of reciprocity, the audience able to receive something because they recognize some of it and to be able to connect with it, but also receive these new ideas that they might not be, may or may not be as palatable to them or who knows, but here's an entry point, um, a way of connecting that was really powerful. Um, the music unit was secret for a variety of reasons. The aims were secret. The goals really difficult to quantify, but also as we're talking about these two visions for American success, the individual and the collective, this you know time tested evolution, or I guess pendulum swing,
Yeah.
about what is, here we go, now I'm at my notes, the baseline divide, um and can you talk about the politics around the politics protecting this work, the politics coming at this work, and or more interestingly, this book's been out for a year, and I'm just wondering what kind of conversations you've had with readers uh,
Mm.
in today's landscape, in today's moment, as they're understanding um, the music unit, the belief in music and connectivity to solve the great despond, and the government's support of it, and also the factions that believed that it was harmful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so complex. I mean, I think at the beginning, and I haven't talked about Charles Seeger, who was the director of the music unit, and Pete Seeger's father. Uh, so that's a whole other, thread in terms of seeding you know, the folk revival. But anyway, Charles Seeger came from a very um, a privileged background, but he also had, very left-wing politics and believed, and so he came in thinking that he was interested in music's ability to persuade, and so he made these song sheets. Um, I mean, it's so complex, right? That it's just like, uh, and yet this idea of it's like a difference between, so Charles Seeger was sort of coming in and saying and using that these songs with cooperative collectivist messages, um that didn't necessarily take in the same way that Margaret's um the way that she was able to come in and meet people where they were, if that makes sense. And so I feel like there is this, I think a lot of people have sort of a visceral negative response to the idea of propaganda. Um, and so there's that. I have gotten a little bit of that, of a sort of surprise. Um, but I think that
Wait, a surprise.
a surprise about that being part of what the government was doing, if that makes sense. Like a little bit of like, I can't believe. that there was, yeah, so for some people that was like going too far, let's say.
Could you explain that a little further? So as people have, I'm just going to repeat back so that as people have been encountering the book, they were surprised that part of the mission of the New Deal was to seed the solution of cooperation into these dying communities, like this terrible circumstance.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, I mean, to me, this was, as I said, Key West was an experiment. I think this was an experiment also. And I guess what I think that it is, where I come out on the end and these big themes about music as community, music as resilience, music as resistance, all of those things. But I feel like, if I think about, and most people uh, connect with those bigger themes, um, that are in the book in terms of like, wow, and also in terms of government support for the arts, government connection to the arts. But I feel like getting into the nitty gritty of like, wow, these song sheets, um, some of what Charles Seeger, was trying to sort of make them, um, I don't know, just like seed these ideas of community through these lyrics in the song sheets, was surprising. And
It seemed to me, just as a reader of your research, that what the song sheets functioned to do was say, "Here's the melody. This," and yes, it had the visuals, but also on the back when it said very briefly, because newspapers, radio, communication was such that you know it seemed like these song sheets served to then say, "Hey, this has been used at this jail, at this mill, at this whatever." And
yeah,
so here's a leaflet that says, here's this song, but really here are all these places that have had uprisings because they're not being reported. They're not connected. It is just, and I think there's a lot of different ways to look at that. And I think that but one of the ways was they served was to connect these desperate, just that's not even the right word, but these individual little collective uprisings across the country to each other.
yeah, well, especially because all of these communities drew from different, you know different pockets of, and many of them were, housing former mill workers, miners, people who where the labor movement had been active, and so I do think, yeah, I mean, I bring up the song sheets because I think they're fascinating. Whether they really had, you know, I am uncertain how much they were even seen.
Yeah.
For me, they're more just these sort of records um, of his attempt to, and to kind of go in from the top and say, hey, here's some songs, you know, that have been shared. Um, but, Sidney would say like that, that's not the way these people in these communities share music. Like they're not looking at songs, they're things passed from the oral tradition and all of that stuff. So, but I think, I mean, I do think in terms of the way that this has resonated for, current readers, I just feel like, I mean, especially, because I finished it during the pandemic, and I think that really highlighted, people were so aware of that loss of a sense of community.
Mhm.
And I think that's something, that um, continues.
Yeah, I think no, I agree. And I love the um example, that the music that Margaret's work specifically, and the conclusions that are drawn of what happens when you come together and not just sing together, but also create art that is reflective of your experience, and that people listen to it and reflect it back. It comes through so significantly in the book.
Y- Yeah, I mean, I feel like at Margaret's sort of second act where she was sent out to California and working in the FSA camps, I feel like she was really able to do what the music unit was intended. She was um given free rein basically, and she did all of it. So um and these were communities that weren't even necessarily built to be permanent homes for these people, but I think that feeling of community and pride that just comes from being recorded, and so she would get everybody together in like a sort of um, talent show, and just have people sing for each other, and you can feel that vibe, in her recordings of people appreciating each other and just appreciating the chance to share what they know. But
And I think too, the mandate, the fact that this was an official thing, backed, the permission that gave to go forth and use music to connect and collaborate. And, you I hope someone does more research about, her last act that occurs off the book that you mentioned in Memphis, where she goes to be active in civil rights and reproductive um, evolution, which I think is really interesting placement for somebody that magnetic, coming in with this much experience around the country of connectivity and music and organizing. Because I think it was actually a labor protest when King was shot there in Memphis. But I want to move back to the fact that your research began as women in music, but also women in work comes through. Like just, it's a whole nother line of plot line. And I'm wondering, and really how it's written out. You mentioned Charlie Seeger, Pete Seeger, but it's Ruth who's not, who you say, who's not even in the story of this instrumental moment. And I'm wondering if quickly you could touch on that, and touch on anecdotally Sidney's uh, being called to the White House, and then how you close a little bit with Margaret, but starting with Ruth, if you wouldn't mind.
yeah, I mean, Ruth Crawford Seeger, she's the one who won the Guggenheim, and she met Margaret
Yeah.
um, on the ship back from Europe. And so that was, but yeah, I mean, Ruth, she's now a very beloved contemporary composer. But she was involved in transcribing and making books and sheet music of all of this folk music. Um, you know, she worked with Alan Lomax, and she really had her ears and her, she was in the music in a way and that she doesn't get credit for. And a lot of those songs that we all might have learned as kids came out of books that she made. And and yes, so yes, people should know about Ruth Crawford Seeger. And I think in general, in terms of women, I mean, it starts at the top with Eleanor Roosevelt, I mean, she was really interested um in putting in allowing more women to rise to higher levels. So it's not because it's not just Sidney um, and Margaret, but also at the top of the special skills division, which is the music unit was part of, was this woman, Grace Falke, who, and so through her, I found out that Eleanor Roosevelt was having White House teas for all of the women who were working in the government at that time. And so I think that it really was this kind of this moment for them. Um, However, part of what I'm talking about in the book is that, Sidney and Margaret were out doing the work, and they didn't necessarily get credit a lot of times. And
I love I love at the end of the book, even Grace, she
yeah,
gets documented in because she eventually married what's his name, who gets
yes.
interviewed, and the interviewer's like, he brought his wife, and then it's like, oh no, I ran that. I
Yeah.
ran that division. All these people reported to me. That's why I'm here talking.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so Grace married Rex Tugwell. Um, and yeah, she was erased. She was a bit erased at the time. I mean, she didn't even get the same title that the other men who were running these divisions got. But they were there. They were doing the work. Um, and yeah, I mean, I feel like um both Margaret and Sidney had these wonderful sort of reflections at the end of their life about um about how how much they didn't get credit for the work that they did.
I um I think it's interesting how it happens too. I've been thinking a lot about it personally recently, and I think it comes through in your book as you pepper these anecdotes throughout this really compelling story that we're jumping around about. But I think when you sit down and read this book, as I hope everyone watching this does, there's so much there. It's in such a clean, concise narrative. It just makes you want to deep dive into even more study. There's so many tendrils to follow, but just in terms of women at work, how it happens every step along the way, and it's just all these individual moments. You highlight where Sidney, who has made these very special recordings, gets an invitation specifically from the president. And when she's admonished by her boss's boss for not showing up, she's like, I never got this invitation. And Charlie Seeger took her recordings and goes and presents it at the White House, but he doesn't know the machine. He doesn't know the context of the song. And can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was something, in the culture and, possibly in Charles Seeger of um of but mostly, I think it was across the board of minimizing women's
time.
work. And so right, so Eleanor Roosevelt especially, but FDR was also interested in these recordings. And so Sidney talks about how um so Charles Seeger's boss came down and was like, "How could you not come to the White House?" And that they wanted you to play their recordings, and Charlie hadn't passed that along to her, and he went in her place. And so yeah, there was a fair amount of bitterness about that towards the end. And what I found is that came through. So some of these recordings, they're at the Library of Congress. People in the folk world know about them, and they're often credited to Charles Seeger. And so I think that was part of what I was hoping to do with the book, was to, give credit where credit was due for the recordings too.
And not only the fact that she physically was there making them, but to go back to my first question was that the specific skill set of these personalities and this people first connectivity and this enthusiasm and energy and respect allowed for them to be made. And those were skill sets that Charlie didn't have. And I think that your work is very elegantly enters these facts into the permanent record, as you will. But I'm wondering, in the 10 minutes we have left, and if anyone listening live has questions, now would be the time to kind of put them in the chat. But, as you said, you finished this research during the pandemic. It's like 6 years later, so much has happened. But I'm curious, as you look at, as you just live, you're obviously watching how music is used to connect, to change, to as this force. And I'm wondering what you see, or if there's anything that you find interesting happening that you might direct our attention to, or that just as you, and I know that's kind of out of left field, but by virtue of the fact that this is your study, I'm sure you just look at things differently, or certain things come to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think, my first book about God Bless America was really the entry point was how it functioned after 9/11 and how that just the act of singing together, how powerful that can be in terms of, creating this sense of community, whether it's at a baseball game or a protest or, and so I think I didn't know that I was just continuing that work in a way with this book of being like, well, the that I think that's part of what was so amazing about that the government, the New Deal, those government administrators kind of recognized that power and they were harnessing it. And um, I think that, you still see it all over, really. I mean, I think eh, it's, you know, This Land Is Your Land, for example, is a song that comes up for people. And, as soon as you're singing it in a group, um, you're connected in that way. And I think that that's something that, you know, we don't have very many opportunities to do that together. I mean, certainly, during the pandemic, I think you mentioned that I sing in a vocal group, and that was just, that was um, a really dangerous activity, right? To sing together. And so I think that coming out of it now and being uh, I don't know. In a way, you know, I think that there are there are going to continue to be reminders of, that role that music can play, and what, um, and uh yeah, important for everybody to remember, that we have that you have that power to connect. I actually did a story, an audio story on senior choirs in San Francisco, and uh, just seeing this story played out over and over again is it's good to remember.
Yeah, my grandfather, I think before he died, he had to go sing at 3 o'clock every day. It was like the most important thing
Yeah.
in his 90s
Yeah.
to go sing. But I think part of what your book highlights is, uh, okay, not what can music do? What does music do? Where does it come out of? Is it a top down? Is it a bottom up? And also just really chronicling the precedent for larger institutions to tap people with vision, even if they don't know what it is. Um, Use what works to coalesce people, and then put people with the skill set. And it's not a technical skill set; it's a people skill set. And the precedent for sending them out into the community to really um, use the music as a tool, but also just sheer force of personality and the I see you, not that different from this land is your land, this land is my land. That reciprocity that is inherent in that song and why it's so powerful, but also just in the ability to have a magnetic personality. It's because people feel seen, and so they give back. And I think that the way that you research and the way that you explain your research really highlights all of that in a way that I think can be very instructive to your readers at this moment in time. And so I really sincerely want to thank you for that. And as I mentioned, my tools are not my normal tools. Can you look and see if there's anything in the chat that I'm missing, if any, because we do have some live attendees. If anyone's asking a question.
I am not seeing anything.
Okay, good. I don't want to miss anybody as I'm talking, including everyone. That would be, not wonderful. What are you working on now? Where has your curiosity taken you? I know you said you're doing audio reporting and audio stories at this point, but just in terms about what you're curious about, even if it's not an active project.
Yeah, well, my active project is a series I just launched on, it's called The Public Works, and it's chronicling how the New Deal transformed the Bay Area, and so going into the history and then looking at how things live on today. So that actually just launched last week. It's going to be a monthly series on KLW, and I think so it's, certainly I feel like I've just been stewing in the New Deal and thinking about what it's left us. Um, and so the in terms of public space, public art, I'm doing a thing on public nature, how um just all of basically, yeah, I'm trying to live back in the New Deal.
Well, I think that's part of the beauty of your book is that, you know, people just imagine and do our way out of really tough times. And, the you end your book before your epilogue about, the real intense parallels of then and now. I think that in terms you mentioned Woody Guthrie singing specifically about um, the deportations to our Spanish native speakers that were happening in the 30s as a first happening. This reminder of um, nothing's new, and even if the solutions that people enacted at the time have been obscured, they're there, they worked, and highlighting these examples is really powerful. I would like to mention, as everyone's so riveted by this discussion, that they're going to buy A Chance to Harmonize from the Country Bookshop, that we were founded the same year as City Lights out in San Francisco.
Oh, nice.
In rural Southern Pines. And I think that that's always a fun thing to mention. Is there anything else you want to leave everyone with?
No, I don't think so. I really appreciated this conversation. Yeah, and I think that as the paperback is coming out, it's fun to revisit, like, oh, right, I wrote this book.
Well, I mean, it's your work is in the rearview mirror, but my work is just beginning, which is
Oh,
getting this book in everybody's hands. And I'm so grateful to you for what it's taught me, for how it's clarified my thinking, and I cannot wait to uh, get it in everyone's hands. So thank you so much.
oh, thank you. Thanks. It was really a pleasure.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.